are introduced it can be done in a way that's sensitive to who kids are, and recognizing that without a deliberate effort to help them understand how people in their community or in their ethnic group have contributed to the discipline, that they may not be predisposed, and they may be predisposed to not feel a sense of belonging and identification, because in the larger society, we don't learn about great mathematicians of color very often, or, other non people from marginalized communities. Likewise, they can learn principles of engineering through hands-on projects that relate to their interests, like digital music. There are also many wonderful examples on the internet of math teachers creating rhymes, raps, and music videos to help their kids remember and relate to math in their lives. So, a lot of this comes down to teacher creativity and kind of a commitment to making those connections between the material and what kids are.
How does CPS's recent move to alter its curriculum interact with federal education policy? Do you see similar changes occurring in other cities if certain conditions are met?
So we don't have a national curriculum. So unlike China or many other countries that have a national curriculum, we don't have that. So the federal government doesn't have a tremendous amount of say in what happens, what textbooks local school districts might select, or what textbooks make the approved list of state-approved curricula, for example. But the federal government does have leverage to influence, to withhold the federal funding that school districts receive if school districts engage in practices or use materials that government doesn't approve of. So there's currently, these efforts have not yet, I think, been successful, but there's currently an effort by the Trump administration to actively try to stop certain kinds of culturally relevant education from happening. This is taking three forms that are relevant to education. First of all, they're trying to ban the use of the 1619 Project, which is a New York Times series about slavery and its role in the history of the United States. They're trying to ban the use of that project by those teaching about race in U.S. schools. The Office of Management and Budget very recently, in early September, directed departments and agencies to dictate what training about race, diversity, or equality can include, explicitly mandating the exclusion of critical race theory. If there was district that wanted to use federal money for professional development and they wanted to teach critical race theory, they wouldn't be able to do that under this initiative. And, in higher ed, they're aggressively investigating Princeton University right now, which is not a K-12 institution, of course, but this is another area where they're trying to punish Princeton for admitting its past history of racial discrimination. So, there's a lot of people feel threatened by this. If we take the example of the Trump administration's opposition to the 1619 Project, the arguments that they make is that this teaches that the hatred of the U.S., that it's not patriotic, that it teaches a version of history that will cause children to not love their country and to reject villainous, the heroic founders of our country, if they learn a fuller history of their actions and not just the good things that they did. So if they learn more about Thomas Jefferson's role as a slaveholder and not just a founding father. So the stated worry is about patriotism. But one can also speculate on other kinds of concerns about the displacement of white male figures at the sort of toppling from the pedestal of the traditionally most highly regarded people in the U.S., category of people in the U.S. who have historically held the most power and privilege and who still hold the most power and privilege. So, one could infer that there are other motivations at play other than the dated ones. And I think you also asked if similar changes are occurring in other cities. And yes, they are, and they've been very controversial. One of the most controversial cases was in Tucson, Arizona, where an ethnic studies curriculum was adopted, implemented, beloved by students, shown to have very promising impact on student achievement, and then banned by the State Board of Education. It's currently under revision, but it was a big controversy. There's a documentary was made about it. It made headlines at the time. It wasn't that long ago. Everywhere this has happened, it's been met with controversy and resistance.
Beyond curriculum changes, what other adjustments could Chicago Public Schools make to achieve more equitable outcomes for its students?
Given the very strong correlation between socioeconomic status, and meaning family resources broadly defined, and academic achievement, and given the way in which students who come from backgrounds of high levels of disadvantage tend to be concentrated in the same schools. So there are schools that serve predominantly very low income kids who are living in under-resourced, segregated communities who are from marginalized backgrounds. CPS could put additional resources into supporting students and families in its most vulnerable communities. Currently, local dollars are typically allocated based on enrollment. And to the extent that there are extra resources for low-income kids, there's usually to come from the federal government through federal Title I grants, for example. But locally, resource allocation doesn't work that way. See, the CPS Central doesn't say, let's identify the schools that serve the lowest income kids and put extra resources to ensure their academic success. That's not how resources are allocated. But that's a change that would help. These are schools where more resources are needed to extend the school day, to extend the school year, to provide additional support for kids in all kinds of ways. Changing resource allocation in that way would take political change because it's not the way things are currently done, but that's a change that I think would be helpful.
Hey, Dr. Lisa Rosen, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And that's a wrap on another episode of UC3P. Credits go to Caroline Kobzanski for producing, interviewing, and editing this episode. Our assistant production managers are Jack Emery and Yawana Lapuri. Our finance director is Aishwarya Kumar, our communications director is Olu Ogidan, and our publisher is Yining Wang. Our intro music is Knockout 2 by Datubi, and our outro music is Yes Yes Y'all by Matt Large. Our cover art was designed by Sharid Raban. Please visit us on our website, uc3p.org. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. My name is Siddhant Wadera, and the main page will be back next week to discuss critical world building.